I'm sending this because your blog used to take stuff like this seriously without turning it into a meme. I don't have a good ending, and I don't have a clean explanation. I have notes, screenshots, and a pattern that kept repeating until we left early. My wife and I were on our honeymoon, doing a long camping loop through the Rockies. We weren't trying to rough it. We had a small camper, a reservation printout, and a route we'd used before, just stretched out longer. We picked a state-run campground that had a bathhouse, an office kiosk, and a few trailheads that came straight out of the loop road. The first sign of anything off was a campsite that didn't match the rest. Most sites had a picnic table, a fire ring, and either a tent or a camper. One site near ours had no tent, no camper, no car, and no reservation tag on the post. It had a low pile of stuff shoved under the table like someone had swept it there. A tarp, a couple of grocery sacks, and a flat rectangle that looked like a folded sign. The fire ring was cold, and there wasn't any trash. It didn't look like a party site or a site somebody had abandoned. It looked like someone was trying to be invisible. Late that afternoon, while we were leveling the camper, a woman stepped out from behind the restroom building and walked straight through our site, between our power post and the picnic table, like it was a sidewalk. She was mid-30s maybe, hair tied back, wearing a hoodie and jeans like she'd been living in them. No backpack, no dog, no phone in her hands. She didn't look lost. She didn't look like she was headed anywhere. She just walked through. My wife said, "Hey, can we help you?" The woman stopped at the edge of our rug and stared at the camper door, not at us. She stood there long enough that I could hear the low hum of our fridge through the thin wall. Then she said, "You're in it." That was it. No other context. I told her we were staying here and asked if she needed directions to the office. She didn't answer. She walked away toward that empty-looking site, and when she got to the post, she turned and looked back at our door again, like she was checking something on a list. The next time was the bathhouse. That night, we went over to brush our teeth before bed. The bathhouse was one of those concrete block buildings with harsh white lights and a loud vent fan. My wife went into the women's side, I went into the men's side. When I came out, my wife was standing just outside the women's door holding her toiletry bag tight like she didn't want to set it down. She said quietly, "That woman is in there. She's sitting in the shower stall." I asked if she was using it. My wife shook her head. "She's just sitting, fully dressed and watching the door." We waited. After a while, the woman came out. She walked past us, close enough that I caught the smell of cold smoke on her hoodie. She looked at my wife's ring, then at our camper key in my hand. Then she said, "You're in it," again. Same flat tone. I tried to keep it normal. I said, "Ma'am, are you staying in the campground? Do you need help?" She didn't answer. She walked toward the loop road, and then without breaking stride, turned into our site again, cut straight through, and continued on the other side like our site was a marked corridor. That's when I started paying attention to repetition. The route she took wasn't random. It was the same line, from the bathhouse area, through our site, toward the empty site, and then down to the trailhead signboard by the dumpsters. I watched her do it again the next morning while I was making coffee. Same path, same speed. She never looked at the ground. She looked at the same fixed points: our camper door, our hitch, the power post, and the site marker. We mentioned it at the office kiosk when we went to buy firewood. The ranger working the window was polite and tired. I described the empty site and the woman crossing through ours. He asked, "Is she bothering you?" I said not exactly, but she kept coming through and she'd been in the bathhouse. He said, "If she's not threatening you, I can't run somebody off on a hunch. Some folks are dispersed and drift in. Keep your stuff locked." He offered to drive by later. That afternoon, we hiked a short loop that starts near the dumpsters. It's a simple trail, nothing remote, but it goes into trees quick and you lose sight of the campground. About 10 minutes in, my wife tapped my arm and nodded back. The woman was behind us on the trail. No day pack, no water bottle, no sunglasses, just hoodie and jeans. She stayed at the same distance, not gaining, not falling back. When we stopped to look at a map board, she stopped. When we started, she started. It wasn't like a normal person trying to pass politely or keep a pace. It was like she was attached to our timing. After a while, I stepped off the trail to the side and said, "Clearly, you can go ahead." I moved so there was room. My wife moved too. The woman stopped dead. She didn't step around us. She didn't look irritated. She just stared at me, then at my wife, then over our shoulders like she was watching for something behind us. She said, "Don't make a lane." I asked what that meant. She didn't answer. We started walking again, and she followed again at that same distance. When we got to a small footbridge, we stepped to the side again, more decisively, and I said, "Please pass us." She said, "I don't pass. You pass." There was nowhere to pass on the bridge. It was one person wide and had railings. The trail behind us was narrow. I didn't want to turn this into a confrontation in the woods, so we just kept moving. The woman stayed behind us the whole loop and peeled off near the dumpsters like she'd completed a route. That night I started a note on my phone titled with the campground name. I'm not proud of it, but I needed something concrete so I didn't feel crazy. I wrote down what she said, where she stood, and the line she walked through our site. I drew a dumb little map with arrows. The next day the pattern tightened. She appeared at our site at the same part of the morning, walking the same line through. She appeared at the bathhouse in the same late evening window, sitting inside the women's side long enough that my wife didn't want to go in. And she appeared on the trail again, always behind us, never passing. We tried practical fixes. I strung a second guy line across the front edge of our rug as a trip line, not to hurt anyone, just to make it clear the space wasn't a walkway. She stepped over it without looking down, like she knew where it was. I moved our camp chairs into her line. She went around them without hesitation, keeping the exact same straight line across the site, like the chairs weren't real obstacles. She didn't kick them or bump them. She simply adjusted by inches and continued on. My wife started keeping her phone in her pocket on video when we walked to the bathhouse. Not pointed at the woman, just recording. Twice, when we went in and out, the woman was in a position that didn't make sense based on where she'd been a minute before. I'm not saying she teleported. I'm saying we watched her go behind the bathhouse and then, without hearing footsteps on gravel, she was already at the corner where our sight line begins, waiting like she'd been there all along. The third night was when it turned from annoying to dangerous. We went to bed early because we were driving the next day. The campground quieted down. I woke up because my wife was grabbing my arm hard. At first I thought it was a coyote or someone dragging a cooler. Then I heard it too. It was a scream right outside the camper. Not a distant sound, not an animal. A human scream, sharp and continuous, like someone had leaned into it until they ran out of air. It cut off and then started again, closer to our door than the fire ring. I sat up and reached for the keys and the flashlight. My wife said, "Don't open it." I didn't. I turned on the camper's porch light from the switch. Through the blind, I saw a shape on the ground near our step. Not a body, not a person lying there. It looked like a pile of clothing or a tarp, low and crumpled. The scream happened again, and the sound came from just beyond the door, but I couldn't match it to a mouth or a face. Then it stopped. We stayed silent, listening. I could hear the bathhouse fan in the distance and someone's RV generator far down the loop. Nothing else. I called out through the door, "Is someone there?" No answer. After a long minute, I cracked the blind just enough to see the edge of our sight. The porch light made a hard circle. The pile was gone. There were no footprints in the dust that I could see from that angle, and no movement. In the morning, There was a single pine needle laid across our doormat, perpendicular to the step like a marker. We hadn't had any pine needles inside the camper the night before, and our doormat was clean when we went to bed. I took a photo of it because I didn't know what else to do. We went to the office again. Different ranger at the window. I said, "Someone screamed outside our camper last night. There's a woman who keeps coming through our site and following us on the trail. She said she doesn't pass, and she keeps saying, 'You're in it.'" The ranger asked if anything was stolen. It wasn't. He asked if she'd threatened us. Not directly. He said, "We can do an extra patrol," and handed me a generic number to call if we felt unsafe. It was the kind of answer that fits the paperwork. We decided we were leaving a day early. We packed fast, kept everything inside, and didn't let the camper door stay open. Around late afternoon, before we hitched up, my wife wanted one last view, just to salvage the day. There was a small sunset overlook a short drive from the campground, one of those pullouts with a short path to a railing. We drove there with the windows up. No music, just watching the mirrors like idiots. When we got to the overlook, the woman was already there. She was sitting on the bench facing the view, hands in her lap, posture straight. No food, no water, no bag. The parking area had only our vehicle and one other car with nobody around it. The sky was starting to go orange, and the wind was pushing through the grass. We stopped at the start of the path. I said, "How did you get here?" She didn't turn. My wife said, "We're leaving." The woman finally spoke, still not turning, like she was reading a line off a sign. "You don't leave it, you trade." I asked, "Trade what?" She said, "A lane." That word again, lane. Like our campsite line was a lane she needed open. I didn't go closer. I took out my phone and started recording openly this time. You can see her back, the bench, the railing. You can hear me asking her to look at us and to tell us her name. She doesn't move. Then, without turning, she slid to the other end of the bench, making room like she expected us to sit. It wasn't inviting. It was procedural, like she had completed a step. My wife whispered, "Don't sit." We backed away. When we got to the car, I looked back and she was still there, facing the view. Back at the campground, as we pulled out, we passed the empty-looking site. It was still empty in the same way, but the folded sign under the table was open now, propped up against the table leg. I couldn't read it from the road. It was blank from that distance, just a pale rectangle. We drove out before full dark. We didn't stop until we hit a lit gas station in the next town. Here's why I'm writing. Since we've been home, the pattern hasn't stopped completely. My wife has found single pine needles on our doorstep twice, laid across the threshold the same way as the doormat. We don't have pine trees near our place. I checked. Also twice while hiking near home, on wide public trails where passing is normal, we've had a woman behind us who kept the same distance for a long stretch. Both times my wife refused to step aside to let her pass. Both times the woman turned off at the next junction without ever going around us. I'm not saying it's definitely the same person. I'm saying the rule showed up again. Stay behind, don't pass, don't let us make a lane. I don't know how to report something that sounds like a schedule. I do know what we saw and heard, and I do know that the scream happened right outside our door, and it didn't belong to any animal I've heard. If you post this, please leave out the specific campground name. I'm not trying to get a place shut down. I just want a record somewhere outside my notes. Because if this escalates again, I want to be able to show that it started there on our honeymoon with a woman who wouldn't pass us.